Once again, Russia has launched a massive missile and drone strike against Ukraine. These strikes have become one of the country's foremost tactics in 2025, and this attack saw it unleash an absolute horde. Hundreds of drones, dozens of missiles, all came streaking through the Ukrainian skies from September 19th to 20th. But this time, Ukraine was ready. It unleashed its F-16s, and those jets did what they do best. Ukrainian F-16 pilots just did the impossible overnight, rendering Russia's latest airstrike almost useless. On September 21st, United 24 media revealed that Ukraine's Air Force had reported an overnight Russian missile and drone strike beginning late in the evening of September 19th. Russia clearly hoped to use the cover of nightfall to ensure as many of its projectiles broke through Ukraine's air defenses as possible. However, Ukraine was ready for the strike and it scrambled its F-16s to tackle around 40 missiles during the night. Those F-16s were successful. The vast majority of the Russian missiles never made it to their targets. This was no small strike. United 24 reports that Ukraine believes Russia launched 619 aerial threats during the nighttime raid. Of those threats, 579 were Shahed-type drones, with which Russia has bombarded Ukraine all year. These drones, though they're of Iranian origin, are now being manufactured in Russia at a rate of about 2,700 drones per month, Ukraine's intelligence services report. The sheer scale of production is what allows Russia to send hundreds of these drones in a single strike. However, Ukraine's F-16s wouldn't have concerned themselves with the drones, which would have been subjected to other countermeasures ranging from electronic warfare to interceptor drones. The F-16 pilots had bigger fish to fry. About 40 fish to be exact. That's how many missiles Russia fired at Ukraine during the overnight strike. Ukraine's Air Force says that the missiles were of various types, though Russia seemed to favor one type in particular. Per the Air Force's Telegram channel, the lion's share of Kh-101 cruise missiles down today were destroyed by Ukrainian fighting Falcons. We'll come back to that missile and its destructive capabilities soon. What we see here is a massive strike with which Russia hoped to cause serious damage to Ukraine's cities. That isn't a revelation. Russia's tactic is one of terror, and it's a tactic that Vladimir Putin has ordered again and again during his invasion. These aerial bombardments are designed to exhaust Ukraine's air defenses, allowing some missiles or drones to slip through with their explosive payloads intact. Ukraine's anti-drone defenses and F-16s did plenty to prevent a major Russian success. The country's defenses managed to neutralize the majority of what Russia sent into Ukraine's airspace. 552 of the 579 Shahed-type drones were either shot down or sent off course. Ukraine's F-16s did the rest of the work, destroying a pair of Russia's nuclear-capable Iskander ballistic missiles and taking out a staggering 29 of the Kh-101s that Russia launched. Ukraine isn't bluffing here. How do we know? Ukraine's Air Force has released footage of the F-16s in action, revealing that they did indeed shoot down the majority of Russia's incoming missiles. Shared by the Sun's YouTube channel, the footage appears to be predominantly shot from the cockpits of Ukraine's F-16s, and we see the same thing over and over, large explosions in the skies as Russia's missiles get taken out. In some cases, we see what almost appears to be promo footage for the F-16s shot from outside the jets themselves, presumably shot using cameras mounted to pilots' helmets. This footage shows missiles being launched from their pylons before streaking through the skies. The cameras don't track the missiles, so we don't see precisely where they go. However, it's safe to assume that a missile released is a missile that's heading straight toward one of Russia's incoming projectiles. Yet more footage seems to have been shot from the ground, demonstrating massive explosions in the sky that must have been Russia's missiles. We also see flashes of a ground-based anti-air system being fired, and it appears that Ukraine was also using surface-to-air missiles or SAMs to confront Russia's missile and drone horde. The outcome is clear. Russia attacked and Ukraine defended, mostly. Despite the good work done by Ukraine's F-16s, SAMs and mobile air defense units which coordinated their defense remarkably, some of Russia's projectiles managed to break through and cause casualties. United 24 reports that impacts and falling debris from drones and missiles were recorded at several sites and, in some cases, caused death or injury. In Dnipro, a residential area was bombarded strongly enough to result in the death of one person and injuries to 36 others, according to United 24. This is a region Russia has targeted throughout the summer with ground-based offensives, so it's clear that the missile and drone strike was intended to unnerve Ukraine's civilians on September 19th and 20th. Ukraine hasn't reported if Russia managed to hit any military targets in Dnipro during the assault, but that almost won't matter to Putin. Russia has constantly targeted civilians throughout the war to create terror in places that are supposed to be somewhat safe behind the front lines. As of July 31st, 13,883 civilians have died, and another 35,548 have been injured thanks to Russia's invasion. Putin will be happy that another 1 dead and 36 injured have been added to those numbers. The Khmelnytsky region didn't escape unscathed either. Located in western Ukraine on the southern Bug River, Khmelnytsky saw enough of Russia's drones and missiles to break through to kill one civilian and injure two others. Reports also suggest that damage from debris and direct strikes was also reported in Mykolaiv and in the Kyiv region. All of this is obviously terrible news for Ukraine. Even one casualty as a result of Russia's airstrike is one casualty too many. Still, it could have been a lot worse if Ukraine's coordinated air defenses, and particularly F-16s, hadn't been so effective during the aerial strike. It's thanks to them that the numbers are as low as they are, and in particular, that the vast majority of missiles weren't able to hit their targets and cause even more extensive damage. Let's focus on Russia's missiles for a moment to highlight just how devastating they can be. Ukraine's Air Force says that the majority of missiles used in the overnight strike were Kh-101s, which are also known in the West as X-101. Designed and developed in Russia, these stealthy subsonic cruise missiles were built specifically to evade air defenses, which may go some way to explaining why Ukraine deployed its F-16s to take them down. It's much better to confront these missiles directly using fighter jets that can not only keep pace with them, but unleash missiles capable of destroying them in the air, than it is to hope that the Kh-101s get caught on a radar and taken out by ground-based defenses. Specifically, Missile Threat says the Kh-101s are capable of flying at low altitudes, practically hugging the terrain, so they literally fly under the radars of air defense systems. Assuming a Kh-101 hits its target, it can deliver an explosive payload of about 450 kilograms, which is equivalent to 992 pounds. That payload can vary depending on Russia's requirements, with the choice of high explosive and fragmentation warheads available. Russia can also pack a submunition warhead, which explodes to unleash several small explosives into its Kh-101s. There is also a version of the missile that is nuclear capable, but this one is dubbed the Kh-102, and it wasn't used in the strike against Ukraine. Army Recognition provides some more details about the missile's versatility, offering extra information about its various warheads. The missile equipped with a high explosive or fragmentation warhead is designed to destroy ground targets such as buildings, bunkers, and military installations. The missiles can also carry a penetrator warhead, which is designed to penetrate hardened and underground targets such as reinforced concrete structures, bunkers, and tunnels, as well as a cluster munition warhead, which can release multiple smaller submunitions to cover a large area and destroy multiple targets, the resource says. Make no mistake about it, the Kh-101 is a very dangerous missile. It's also a missile that Russia can fire from far behind the front lines of the Ukraine war. There is some dispute about the missile's range. Missile Threat claims that the Kh-101 can travel up to 2,800 kilometers, or about 1,740 miles. Army Recognition says that the missile's range is even longer than this impressive distance, topping out at up to 5,500 kilometers, or about 3,417 miles. Either way, these ranges highlight how much of a threat the Kh-101 represents beyond its powerful payload. Ukraine can't hit these missiles at their source outside of the occasional long-range strike against the Russian air bases that play host to them. Russia can launch Kh-101s from relative safety. All Ukraine can usually do is react to shoot them out of the skies. We know that Ukraine used its F-16 to take out these terrifying cruise missiles. However, an F-16 is just an aerial platform, as impressive as it may be for a fighter jet that dates back to the Cold War era. Aerial platforms alone can't take out missiles unless their pilots have very unfortunate death wishes. So Ukraine's F-16s needed missiles of their own to tackle the incoming Kh-101s. And the missile chosen for this particular strike was more than up to the task: the AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missile. Defense Blog says that this is the missile we see being unleashed several times by Ukraine's F-16s in the footage shared by Ukraine's Air Force. It's also the perfect counter to Russia's Kh-101s. The US Air Force provides the basic details about the Sidewinder, noting that it's a supersonic air-to-air missile that uses heat-seeking technology to lock onto and take out a target. Beyond that heat-seeking, the Sidewinder also comes loaded with a high-explosive annular blast fragmentation warhead that tears through anything that it hits. Ironically, in a war that has so often seen Putin rely on ancient Soviet-era weapons to assault Ukraine, the original version of the Sidewinder is one of the oldest weapons used in Ukraine. The US Air Force says that the first version of the missile was introduced in 1956, making this missile a classic case of the adage, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." The Sidewinder may not need fixing, but there's no harm in a little tweak here and there. And if you notice that we mentioned that Ukraine used the AIM-9 Sidewinder to defend against Russia's missile hordes, you'll have figured out that its missiles were one of the tweaked versions. The US Air Force says that the Sidewinder 9L variant brings with it a more powerful solid propellant-fueled rocket motor, presumably meaning it can reach higher speeds than the original Sidewinder. It also has a better optical fuse, which offers resistance to the electronic countermeasures Russia loves to use, in addition to boosting the missile's lethality. AIM-9Ls were also the first version of the Sidewinder that was capable of attacking a target from all angles, including head-on, which feeds into the increased lethality. A few more details come from the War Thunder Wiki, which notes that the AIM-9L entered service in 1977 and that it has an 80% launch-to-kill ratio. It's unknown how many of these Sidewinders Ukraine unleashed on the night of September 19th into 20th, but we now know that at least 8 out of every 10 of its missiles hit their targets. The AIM-9L can also lock onto its target from 11 kilometers or about 6.8 miles away, which is more than twice the lock-on range of the original Sidewinder. The missile isn't perfect, it's vulnerable to flares and can be evaded by a particularly maneuverable aerial platform. However, none of that would have mattered during Russia's airstrike, as the AIM-9L was taking on missiles, not fighter jets. And it was successful, many times over, according to Ukraine. Ukraine's use of the F-16s to take out the Kh-101s is far from the first instance of its Western fighter jets proving to be more than a match for Russia's missiles. In March, United 24 reported that Ukraine has also managed to use Dassault Mirage 2000s provided by France to take out the very same type of missile. In what went down as Ukraine's first usage of these French-made fighter jets, a Mirage 2000 engaged a Kh-101 in a head-on trajectory before launching an unspecified air-to-air missile at a sharp angle. Whatever this missile was, it was maneuverable enough to adjust course almost as soon as it was launched, allowing it to score a direct strike against the Kh-101. What we see here is that Ukraine has cracked the code. Russia built its Kh-101s to overcome most air defense systems thanks to its terrain-hugging trajectory. That means Patriots and similar systems aren't as effective as Ukraine would like them to be against these powerful cruise missiles. F-16s loaded with Sidewinders offer the answer. Maneuverable enough to avoid missiles in flight and loaded with a weapon that can catch and destroy the Kh-101, Ukraine's F-16s are doing what almost nothing else in the country's arsenal is capable of doing. And it's a job that we've seen the F-16 excel at several times since it arrived in Ukraine. Back in August 2024, just as the first batch of Western F-16s were being delivered to Ukraine, the Atlantic Council outlined exactly how most anticipated that Ukraine would use these jets. With a combat role unlikely at this stage, Ukrainian F-16s will primarily be used to strengthen the country's air defenses, the Atlantic Council said. The planes Kyiv has received are ideally suited to the task of shooting down the Russian missiles and drones that are regularly fired at Ukrainian cities and vital infrastructure. Those words proved prophetic. The same outlet said that F-16s would be more suitable for this job than the Soviet-era platforms Ukraine had at the time. That's not necessarily because the F-16 is a better aerial platform, though it likely is. Rather, F-16s are better for air defense because they can be equipped with high-tech missiles, such as the previously mentioned Sidewinders, that Soviet-era aerial platforms can't fire. Defense Blog builds on this point, noting that Ukraine had just 69 airframes prior to the arrival of the F-16 in the country. Ukraine had done the best it could with those airframes, which included MiG-29s and Su-27s. Some had been adapted so they could fire NATO-compatible munitions, for instance. However, even with those weapons loaded, these Soviet platforms lack advanced sensors, survivability, and the sort of weapons integration that makes the F-16 so dangerous when facing down incoming Russian missiles. The Atlantic Council also noted that Ukraine's F-16s may not have been suitable for frontline operations. They are older versions of the platform, the Council said, meaning they have limited radar reach. That puts the F-16s Ukraine has at risk from Russia's air defenses, and if Russia dares to deploy them again in Ukraine, the most advanced Russian fighters like the Su-35. Ukraine and its partners recognize this fact, with the Atlantic Council noting that the first batch of F-16s Ukraine received in August came loaded with precisely the types of missiles needed to allow the jets to serve in an air defense role. And serve they have. Long before Ukraine used its F-16s to shoot down potentially dozens of Russian Kh-101s in September, they'd proven themselves effective for air defense several times. In November 2024, for instance, Militarny reported that Ukraine managed to use its F-16s to shoot down about 10 aerial targets during a Russian blitz, with at least one of those targets being taken out over the Dnipro region that Russia is targeting almost a year later. Bear in mind that November is just 3 months or so after the first F-16s arrived in Ukraine. The country's pilots underwent extensive training before the platform's arrival, of course. But to be so effective that these pilots could shoot down several Russian missiles in a single night tells us that Ukraine's pilots adapted to a once unfamiliar aerial platform very quickly. Fast forward to January 2025 and we learned just how quickly. It was in that month that the Kyiv Independent reported that one Ukrainian F-16 pilot had managed to take out 6 Russian cruise missiles in a single mission, which was reported as a world first. This was a particularly impressive feat because the pilot ran out of missiles after taking out the first 4 Russian targets. The final 2 cruise missiles were destroyed using the F-16's cannons. Ukraine's Air Force Command was quick to laud the feat on Facebook, stating, "For the first time in the history of the Fighting Falcon, an F-16 fighter jet destroyed 6 Russian cruise missiles in one combat mission." The confidence of Ukraine's pilots in their F-16s has grown quickly. Now they're at the point where they're using this US-made fighter jet every day. And counter to what many thought when the first batch of F-16s arrived, Ukraine is also using F-16s for offensive operations. That's according to US Army General Christopher G. Cavoli, who leads both Supreme Allied Command Europe and US European Command. Speaking to the Senate Armed Services Committee in April, Cavoli said, "They fly every day. They've defeated a large number of cruise missile threats, and they've delivered an awful lot of offensive attacks as well, specifically bombing attacks in the east." Whether it's attack or defense, Ukraine knows what it's doing with its F-16s. But as is the case with much of the Western-made equipment Ukraine has received in its fight against Russia, the country could always use more. So far, 87 F-16s have been pledged to Ukraine. A little over half have been delivered. The Netherlands has sent 24 that it promised, with Norway having done the same for the 14 it said it would send. Denmark is a touch behind, having handed over 12 of the 19 that it promised to Ukraine as of December 2024. Then there's Belgium. The country that has made the biggest promise to Ukraine has also yet to deliver a single one of the 30 F-16s it said it would provide. There is a good reason for this. Belgium is awaiting delivery of F-35s that are supposed to be replacing the aging F-16s in its air force. Still, all it has delivered to Ukraine so far is a vague promise that the first batch of jets would be provided in the coming months, which was said back in August. Ukraine will be hoping that "in the coming months" translates to very soon. After all, September 19th to 20th proved how effective its pilots can be with the F-16s they already have at their disposal. When the 30 Belgium has promised, along with the 7 still to come from Denmark arrive, Ukraine's air defenses will get even stronger. And if Poland has its way, Russia won't be able to rely on its airstrikes anywhere near as much as it has been in 2025. Ukraine's F-16s may be on the verge of getting a chance to rest, as Poland slaps Putin with a demand that NATO close the sky on Russia. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's latest and greatest uses of its F-16s. And thank you, as always, for watching.